this first year, I'm your host, Zach Waite, of course, and today we are joined by Matt Legg, who's a first-year student doing, or thinking of doing, zoology with herpetology. Thank you very much for joining, Matt. It is a pleasure to have you.
Hello, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so, Matt, could you briefly tell us why exactly it was that I ended up dragging you along here?
Well, you're sort of trying to think of something quite different, because normally you do a lot of more academic-based topics.
Generally, yes.
And as there's a large reptile keeping community in Bangor University, we thought it'd be quite interesting to do a husbandry kind of talk. And my talk on bioactives did very well at Herpstock a few months ago, so thought it'd be quite good to do one here.
Yeah, that pretty much boils it down. Okay, but before we get to that, as most regular listeners will know, we tend to do a news segment that relates to the rough topic of the week. In this case, it's to do with reptile and amphibian husbandry of varying sorts, and there's been a few things that have popped up lately, or fairly recently, to do with herps and the like. So, one thing that's of a bit of relevance to this would be, it might not seem this way at first, but it is the discovery of a new species of gecko in, I think it was northeastern Madagascar, wasn't it?
Like north central sort of Madagascar.
Somewhere around that, where
Yeah.
I think this would be, if it was northeast, yeah, that would be where the rainforests are in Madagascar.
Yeah, it's more of a rainforest kind of species.
Yeah, because for those who do not know, Madagascar is very, very heavily divided into a lot of different and very cut-off biomes from each other. The eastern side, which has access to the Indian Ocean, is very, very wet and has a lot of tropical forest. The west side, however, is extremely dry. I can speak from personal experience. I would know what it's like. It's horrible, after too long at least. But, yeah, they've discovered a new species of, I think it mentions a leaf-tailed gecko, and as with a lot of these quote-unquote new species discovered, it's one of those species that's been discovered. Well, I say discovered. It was people already knew it existed, but didn't know it was a separate species, wasn't it?
Yeah, it used to be. They used to think it was just a type of Euplatus fantasius, which is the satanic leaf-tailed gecko.
Yeah, the satanic leaf-tailed gecko.
Yeah, and it's only recently when they're doing some like DNA testing in that way found actually this thing's quite different. It's its own, and they've decided it's its own species, which they look very similar. However, this species, this new one, it has quite a long body length in comparison to the other ones, but the tail length is quite short, and also the mouth is a different shade of red as well. So it's quite hard to identify if you don't know what you're looking for.
But but they're sufficiently similar that they could be mistaken for the same species, just different individuals or something.
Yeah, exactly. And the issue is because of that, is for ages they've been exported from Madagascar under the same species. So this species, which is Euplatus fiorentina,
the new species.
The issue is now you've had two separate species under the same name, under the same scientific name, being interbred together. So now the captive population, there's a good chance that they aren't actually either type. They could be hybrids. So that poses various questions when it comes to both the market and when it comes to pricing your animals, etc. But also if in zoos and that, if an issue was to happen in the future,
you wouldn't.
Can you use these animals in conservation, like captive breeding and release efforts when they aren't actually pure? So there might have to be some further genetic testing to get an idea of what our captive population's like.
So it's almost similar to the Scottish wildcat fiasco happening now, or at least it's a potential thing that could arise.
Yeah, but like in the captive population, definitely.
Yeah, but as you implied, if something should happen to the wild population, we need to use the captive animals perhaps to bring back the wild population. This could cause a problem.
Exactly. Which a solution could be using, because I know there's been a captive keeper stud book for Chinese crocodile lizards, so that could be a possibility. After they do some genetic testing, they could, once they've sort of separated or something, they could possibly have a captive stud book. However, obviously that depends, the reliability of that depends on the individuals.
Sorry, I need to ask something. What is a captive stud book? I've not heard that term before.
It's quite recent. They've been basically, so most people in the zoo world will know about the EU stud book, and that's where they keep records of all of the animals in zoological collections, and who's related to who, who's what, blah blah blah, and then they can like make decisions on where animals should be moved around to increase genetic diversity. It's exactly the same thing, but it's a captive one for private keepers. However, obviously, it does depend on the keepers. However, they have started to work with some zoos and that, so when you get some zoos involved in that, hopefully it'll keep things going down the right track, which will be quite interesting to see in the future.
Alright, so it's basically a genetic map, in effect.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. Moving on from that, there's also been a few things that probably relate a bit more to your areas of expertise in this, which is because of how these geckos have been you say they've been, a lot of the time they've been taken from the wild?
Yes, correct.
Right, that, generally speaking, does that tend to go well for the lizards or the reptiles in question? To the best of my knowledge, it doesn't.
Most of the time, no. The thing is, though, there are some cases where actually, when it's done responsibly, when the animals are shipped properly, when they're collected responsibly when they're under tight regulations from CITES, there have been cases, including in Madagascar actually, where the locals have stopped destroying the native habitat and instead they protect it because simply they can harvest those animals, and so if they keep a sustainable population, they've got a steady income, but it's only part of the year. So sometimes it does work, but a majority of the time it doesn't work. There's often a lot of habitat destruction involved, obviously some of the shipment and housing methods for animals. It depends on the exporters. Some are very, very good. I've seen some which were very, very outstandingly well done, but at the same time there is a lot of bad stuff, and a lot of bad ones, and also obviously the illegal smuggling, the black market.
Therein lies most of the problem.
Yeah, and the issue
especially if they're in high demand.
Exactly, and these guys have become, in last few years or so, they're becoming very high demand because there was a meme going around actually. It's where a lot of it happened. A meme
I've not seen this one.
There's a meme with a satanic leaf-tailed gecko, and it's like screaming, and then people were taking these photos and putting little captions on it. And obviously, when you've got a very cool, crazy-looking animal, because if you look them up on Google, they look really, really cool. Suddenly, the demand for them went up really, really high. They are being bred in captivity now by private keepers, and there is a captive bred population. However, obviously, some people it's easier and cheaper to get wild caught stock.
Just swipe it. When it's there, you won't have to pay anything.
Yeah, and also for people buying them, for example, in the UK, a wild caught animal is going to be cheaper. And the issue is, a lot of people who get them don't quite realise their needs. This is actually a species that does really well in a bioactive area, which we'll come on to later on. But the main thing is people think Madagascar, tropical, hot, nice and humid, but it's not always. And where these guys are from, it's very wet. It is very wet, but it's quite a bit cooler. So, ideally, day temperature should be around 25 degrees Celsius kind of mark. And if in a natural habitat there are some spikes where it's going up to 30, sure, it's hot then, but it's only for part of the year, and they're going down to leaf litter and hiding and going underneath bark and keeping in the cool, more damp areas anyway, avoiding those extremes. So in captivity, you'd want somewhere between 20 to 25 degrees Celsius in the day, but then about 15 or so degrees Celsius at night. So it's quite a lot cooler than a lot of people think.
Right, you were mentioning a few things to do with specific requirements to do with reptiles as a whole and things like that. There was something that you showed me a short while back of something that you don't see every day. I think it was a pond turtle of some sort that was scurrying up a wall.
Yes.
Could you explain what was going on with that a bit?
Yes. So from the looks of it, the video doesn't get very close in on it, so it's quite hard to see what it is. But I think it's a common snapping turtle. It might be an alligator snapper by the looks of it.
But it had claws, and distinct tail, all that sort of
stuff. Yeah, and they're quite commonly kept, especially the common snappers are quite commonly kept by people in Southeast Asia as pets in the reptile hobby.
Southeast Asia, you said?
Yeah, Southeast Asia. They are a North American species. but as we keep them in the UK, the reptile hobby in Southeast Asia is a lot bigger than people think. It's actually quite a large hobby, and especially common snappers are very commonly kept both by reptile keepers but also by fish keepers. When they have these big outdoor ponds with like alligator gar and arapaima in it, they also chuck a snapping turtle in there because it looks cool. And in this
Even though you'd never see it half the time.
yeah, even though you'd hardly ever see it. Yeah, in this video, there's like a porch of a house, and it's where the porch like connects to the actual house, and it's made this corner, and this turtle's like gone and scurried right to the underside of the roof, which I think is a very important. It's funny. It's a funny video and blah blah. There's all that sort of thing. It's got,
turtles don't normally climb.
well,
they can, but
yeah,
they don't.
They don't normally, but I think it highlights how important it is to have secure outdoor enclosures if you're keeping all chelonia outdoors. So both, including tortoises. I've seen photos of adult leopard tortoises in South Africa scaling chain and net and mesh fences.
And they can dig, of course.
Obviously,
can't they?
and obviously they can dig under. But a lot of people often think about digging mainly more for keeping animals out rather than keeping them in. That's what people's mindset goes, but they can dig out. But a lot of people just have a fence with no overhang, and if you've got a chain fence, they can climb up anywhere. If you've got like a
slip their legs through the links or something.
yeah, exactly. Or if you've got a like a more solid wall in the corners, like in that video, they can easily climb up the corners. So it's important to have overhangs if you're keeping these turtles outside, or any chelonia, including little Herman's tortoise at home.
Right, and there's been a few things also to do with not just the looking after them in enclosures, but also to do with the specific ways of handling them as well. There was another thing that you showed me. It was it's a website / Facebook group, I believe. It's called Anatomica, I believe.
Yeah, it's
and from what you showed me, is it basically to do with I think it's stuff to do with I think the best way to describe it is it sort of safe reptile keeping or something like that. Is that the general idea of it?
No, the page itself is just.
Oh, sorry.
No, sorry. The page itself is really just showing cool stuff. That's what it is.
Right.
But they've been making quite a lot of interesting posts recently, because what they do is they do what is it? I'm probably a butcher to pronunciation, but it's like diaphanization, I believe is how you pronounce it. It's a way of
diaphanization. That's the one.
Yeah, it's a way of preserving animals. So like how you have taxidermy and you have wet specimens. This is a way of preserving specimens while you can see the skeleton and the muscle structures. And what they do is they skin the animal, remove the fat, remove the organs, and then once it's been set and processed, they then inject the cartilage with different colours, coloured dye, and they inject the bones with different coloured dyes. And you might have seen these photos where you have these crazy looking, like transparent animals with like bright pink and bright blue bones going on Facebook.
Basically highlights all their musculature, their skeletal structure.
Exactly. And this page mainly concentrates on doing that. However, what he started doing recently is showing photos of animals which have had different issues in like captive life.
So it affects their skeletal structure and things.
Exactly. So like there was an interesting post with a, if I remember correctly, I think it's a bearded dragon that had metabolic bone disease, and you can see all of the individual like little fractures in the bone and how the bone's actually deformed, which is quite interesting to see. And
due to lack of calcium, I'm presuming.
It would have been either lack of calcium, or it could have been an imbalance between phosphorus and calcium, or it could have been lack of D3. Or there's so many potential causes for metabolic bone disease. It's not just a black and white. They don't get calcium. It could be they might have too much calcium, or they might have too much phosphorus, or they might have this right amount of those minerals, but not enough not good quality UVB lighting to allow them to produce vitamin D3, because D3 binds the minerals to the bones.
I've heard of that. It's why a lot of reptile keepers need to install things like UV lights into their tanks and stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, so most lizards require UV. I personally give UV to all of my lizards. There's some debate with some species, however, really, they do a lot better with UV lighting, and the issue is people say some animals you can supplement it via diet with different powders, which, yes, you can do. However, the problem is when the animal's eating it, it can't control how much vitamin D3 is in the body. When it's done naturally on the skin, when the skin reacts with the UV waves, which is why you need UV light, it can stop producing vitamin D3 if required. If it's producing too much, it can stop. When in a diet, it can't do that, so they have issues when they overdose on it. So it's better to give them UVB lighting, in my opinion. Snakes, they can get vitamin D3 through the liver of their prey. However, that's not all snakes. So some snakes must have it, like rough green snakes, which are an insect-eating species. And most insect-eating species or amphibian/lizard-eating species, they pretty much, like a lizard, they have to have it. And you have other snakes like corn snakes and the royal pythons, which they don't need it. They have been kept and bred as long as they have been without it. So I won't say they require it, they must have it, but they certainly do benefit strongly from it. So if you can, it's always good to provide the option.
So one thing that relates to, I suppose, with the improper handling of it, winding it back a little bit there, is there's been something that this was something that was mentioned on ABC News that covered a quote-unquote reptile cafe. It's a bit similar to that strange fad I've noticed pop up here and there of the things like the kitten cafes or the puppy cafes, but this one's for reptiles. This one's in Cambodia, I believe, and we were speaking about, before we went on the air, we were speaking a bit about this and possible implications of it. And there are a few things that you had to say about it which relate to the handling of the reptiles. Could you explain a little bit more about that? What do you think of it?
Yeah, I'm personally not a fan of these reptile cafes that have been popping up. There's this one, for example, is in Cambodia. They've been appearing in Japan. They've been in Japan for a few years now, actually. And I think there's a few appearing up in America as well. I've seen, like, when you see little videos on Facebook. Now, the issue is you have these animals which are being very intensely worked. They're going out every single day because often in Asian countries, typically they aren't as strict on animal welfare laws and that. So they aren't as strict with regards to when the animals should be taking breaks and those sort of things from a legal standpoint.
It's a cultural difference.
Yeah, it's a cultural difference sort of thing. And so what the issue is it's easier to end up overworking these animals. And
or keeping them in slightly different conditions to the ones they would like, even, I imagine.
Yeah. Also, there's yes, although I will say, in the West as well, we don't there's quite a common viewpoint with keeping reptiles, which is very, very controversial. We sort of there's very much just two sides almost. So I won't say that the West has...
We won't go in that direction.
We won't go in that direction, but I won't say the West has the most astounding animal welfare, because honestly, it depends. However, when it comes to working with animals, we are a bit strict in how long they work for and how many hours they do, etc.
So there's more regulations.
Yeah, there's more regulations, and also there's harsher punishments if they are mistreated. And the issue is with these cafes is you've got these animals which realistically, they're coming out most days. They're being out most days. They're being out for long hours each day. People are touching them, which I do animal encounters. I do educational encounters. I went to the Brownies with as part of HerpSoc the other night. So I'm not saying animal encounters are bad. However,
but it's the rate at which you're exposing these animals to human contact.
Exactly.
And a lot of them, they're not like dogs. They don't thrive off human contact. A snake will tolerate you holding it, but it's not really going to appreciate it, except for probably if you're nice and warm and it's feeling cold.
Yeah, they don't really gain any pleasure from human interaction. They don't really enjoy it. They can. Some species, some animals can recognise you, but they don't recognise you because they like you. They recognise you as a food source, and that's as far as it goes. Really, they don't love coming out. They don't love cuddling you. They don't enjoy these sort of things. They just tolerate it. And in this article, actually, in this Cambodian coffee shop, they showed some photos, which they didn't mean anything by it. They just thought, there's some cool photos. Let's put them in the article.
It was lizards, snakes, even a fairly harmless, don't worry, a scorpion.
Yeah.
And they were just crouched and scurrying around on the table and the floor and stuff.
Yeah, and the very first photo in this article is a royal python, some sort of morph. I'm not great with morphs, so
it was pale yellow.
It was a
pale yellow one. That's all we need to know.
It was a type of royal python morph, and it was wrapped around someone's cup, and the cup was an iced coffee, had little ice cubes and that growing in it. And the reason the snake is wrapped around it is because it's on a very smooth wooden table, and it's got nowhere else to grip. So it's pretty much either I grip around this and get really, really cold, or I fall. So obviously that isn't ideal for the animal when it's being constantly on and off, being exposed to these drastic temperature changes. It can make them quite sick.
They need stability in the terms of the temperatures.
Yeah, exactly. Like, reptiles are quite hardy. They're a lot hardier than people give them credit for when it comes to temperature changes. However, the biggest issue is when there's sudden, constant temperature fluctuations. And it's like there's another photo, and I think it was the same royal python by the looks of it.
Yeah, by a blue-tongued skink, I believe.
Yeah, it was one of like the Indonesian species, I think it was, a blue-tongued skink.
Didn't know you got them there as well.
Yeah, also like in New Guinea and that as well. They sort of spread up there, and the islands around there.
Okay.
And it looks like it's from one of those islands, which are more commonly kept outside of Australia than the Australian subspecies. And they're on the same table, so you've got this python, which could bite, constrict and kill the skink, and at the same time you've got this skink that's got very powerful jaws. Like, a lot of their diet in the wild is snails and other mollusks, so if you figure out how
their shells.
Exactly, they're shell crushers. So if you've got this massive skink next to this snake and this skink decides to go and bite,
each could injure the other.
Exactly, they could pretty much kill each other.
To say nothing of the scorpion.
Yeah, and then the scorpion in the photos, it wasn't too bad. The photos was just them holding it, and
it was an emperor scorpion, and those are pretty harmless, I think, to humans.
Yeah, I think this one was actually one of the Asian forest ones, I think, by the looks of it.
Emperor scorpions lived in Asia.
No, they don't. No, they don't.
Oh right, sorry.
That's right. No, don't.
Apologies to the listeners there.
But no, basically, words come through. Yeah, no, basically, that wasn't too bad. It was just showing them holding in there, but obviously, again with invertebrates, you shouldn't be handling them too excessively either, because
they don't appreciate
it. And also the risk is when you're doing invertebrate handling, if they fall, if you've got large invertebrates like tarantulas and scorpions, etc., and they fall from some height, they can split open, kind of like a hard-boiled egg.
They burst. Yeah, I've seen it happen. They go splat.
Yeah. And so obviously there are potential risks there, especially by the looks of it, by how it's appearing and how I know some of the Japanese ones are done. They pretty much dump the animal on the table and then they go and leave you. So you got these people who are drinking their coffee and that by themselves, unattended with these animals, and so they could be
not potential a good combination.
Exactly, and sure, there's always staff around. So if an animal was to fight each other or to fall, they can deal with it. But the fact is, it shouldn't reach that point beforehand when you're doing responsible encounters.
Yeah.
What I found quite interesting also very quickly is linking back to that Facebook page we were saying about earlier. They did a really cool post which was of a chameleon. I think it's a veiled chameleon if I remember correctly.
With broken ribs.
Yeah, and its ribs were just crushed. And they did a little side-by-side post showing a little diagram of proper chameleon handling. Because it's quite common for people to see a chameleon and just go and grab it, because with a rat you can just go and grab it by its stomach, pick it up sort of thing. But with a chameleon, because of how different they are, you end up crushing the ribs, and it was really interesting seeing.
If I may briefly interject there, something that should be mentioned about chameleons is they've got a very different rib structure with it's differently arranged, and also the ribs are very, very thin compared to other lizards, so they're very, very I think it's because of the fact they've got very, very tall, narrow bodies, isn't it? But they're very, very delicate as a result.
Yeah, and so when you go and grab a chameleon, you sort of yank it off sort of thing, because they've got a very strong grip, so they're going to hang on to this branch, because they're thinking, oh no, I'm being attacked by some predator, and instinctively they'll grip on with their feet and their tail. They've got a very strong grip, you're yanking at it, and the chameleon doesn't react, because reptiles, they are very good at not showing pain. Like, if you're seeing a reptile physically in pain, that means it's really majorly bad, something crucially wrong, because often, they can break their legs and that and carry on. I mean, I saw someone who had a little bearded dragon, and it got its foot ripped off by another bearded dragon, and later on that day it was running around feeding. The thing is obviously it would have some sort of pain. It would be, it's not a very pleasant thing, but they're very good at dealing with that and very good at hiding it. So just because you've picked a chameleon up and it's still walking around and feeding doesn't mean that damage hasn't already been done.
Right, final thing, because we don't have much time for this part, on the other end of the spectrum, perhaps a little different, is something that turned up recently, and this is a thing in Melbourne, in Australia, and this is what the news article describes it as, a quote-unquote rattlesnake gym. And it appears to be, and what this thing appears to be is basically a sort of a facility in the zoo. I don't think it says something about it being public or anything yet.
No, it's not.
And it basically says it's a means of combating obesity in reptiles, which is fairly common to my knowledge. What sort of things would... how does obesity affect reptiles compared to, say, mammals or something?
So the issue is because there's been a massive movement with especially dog and cat owners to try and have their pets lose weight and try and be at a healthy weight. And we don't really think about lizards, we don't think about snakes, we don't think about how excess weight affects them. So when you've got like a lizard, for example, it can affect their joints, it's extra strain on the joints. They have very different body structure to like most mammals, and the way they move around is very different. And they're not designed to carry all this excess weight, so they can really mess up with their wrists, especially the wrist and ankle joints, and potentially cause them to end up being crippled from, quite a young age. Also with like snakes and that, like it's very common with black-headed pythons, which are an Australian species. Naturally, most of their diet is lizards. They mostly eat lizards in the wild, like bearded dragons, blue-tongued skinks, field-neck lizards, etc. That's the majority of the diet, with the odd mammal, the odd bird here and there. Because of how hard it is to get access to such prey items in captivity, especially in the UK, most UK keepers feed them mostly on rats and mice and even small guinea pigs, etc. And often these snakes only live to be about like near 9 or so years old, and when you do a dissection on them, they've got a very fatty liver.
And everything else by the looks of it, from what I've seen of them. You showed me a diagram
Yes.
showing a obese snake that was cut open, and all of its inner body was basically lined with fat.
Yeah, because the thing with snakes is they carry fat very differently from most other animals. So when you see a pet snake and you can start feeling it's a tiny bit squidgy on the outside, that thing's already morbidly obese, because they carry the fat on the inside of the body cavity. It sort of like follows down like where the
Lining their organs and
exactly.
stuff.
And so for the fat to actually reach the outside, starting being deposited on the outside part, underneath the skin, that means that animals are already very obese and really needs a lot of help.
Right. I think that basically covers all we have for now. We will join you later after the break to talk about Matt's proper work to do with his stuff on bioactive vivaria. Hope you enjoy it.
I think that went quite well.
A man with a penchant for expensive donuts. It's Cameron Ward on Storm FM.